It's doing its thing?
It's doing its thing.
Okay, I'll call to order the meeting of the Board of Building Regulation Examiners and Appeals for February 6, 2014. As soon as you get ready, if we can call roll, please.
All right. Mr. Steele?
Here.
Mr. Straight? Mr. Ferdine?
Here.
Mr. Hickle?
Here.
Mr. Gray?
Here.
Mr. Edwards?
Here.
Mr. Merchant?
Here.
Mr. Feller? Mr. Loken?
Here. You're puffing. I'd like to give our new people on the board just a short opportunity to give a quick paragraph on your background for the sake of the rest of the members, so we know how you fit into the program here a little bit. Yes.
Mr. Steele, I would suggest, well, first of all, I'll introduce staff, and then I'd suggest that all members give a short self-introduction so that the new members know what's going on with the existing members, if I could suggest that.
I like that. Okay.
Ms. Walsh?
Ms. Walsh is, I'm the Deputy Director of Development Services and the building official, and I am present. To my left is Sam Severin from the Municipal Attorney's Office.
Sam Severin, Municipal Attorney's Office. That just about covers it. I think I'm primarily here just to kind of observe this evening.
Ross Thompson, the Manager of Engineering Services, and I supervise plan review and oversee the permit counter in the building department.
And Jerry Weaver, Director of Community Development, which includes Development Services and Planning.
I'll start. I'm Scott Boney. I'm an architect with Grimm Architects and currently serving as the board. I've been on for 2, 3, 4 terms, something like that. It's been a while. Mr. Ferdine?
I'm Craig Ferdine, mechanical engineer with PDC. That's about it. Yeah.
Vice Chair?
Oh, and I'm vice chair. Thankfully, Mr. Boney is here all the time, so it's an easy job.
Barry Gray, representing Superior Plumbing and Heating on the plumbing mechanical contractor side. I believe this is my 3rd term.
I'm John Edwards. I'm in the warehouse rental business, and I'm a general contractor and also a mechanical contractor. And I build for our own rental portfolio. I've been dealing with the building department for 31 years, been in Alaska 32, and I hope I can add something to the board.
Thank you. Mr. Steele?
I'm John Steele, and I'm an architect member of the board. I work with the firm Bettisworth North, and I've been on the board for many terms, and architect since '81 in the state of Alaska.
Tyler Loken, Loken Construction, subcontractor, framing and siding, commercial and residential. 360 Design Build is another company I have, which is a general contractor, and I also have a crane business. So I don't know what else. I've been on past couple code review committees and served as president of the Home Builders last year. I like to hunt and I like to build. So,
Welcome.
thank you.
Mr. Merchant?
Rob Merchant with Moore Heating. Been on the board representing the mechanical contractors. Been on the board, I believe this is the 3rd year, and been with Moore Heating 20 years. One of the owner-operators there, and actually enjoy working on the board here.
My name's Troy Feller. I'm a structural engineer, principal at BBFM Engineers. Been practicing structural engineering in Anchorage since 1989, and it's my third term on the board.
I'm Sterling Strait. I'm a civil engineer practicing structural engineering in Anchorage. Work for Nana Worley Parsons. Been on the board for a couple of years now and very much enjoy being a part of the process.
Hi, Ray Hickle. I represent the residential side. Happy to be here, and I look forward to seeing where I can help. Government, in my opinion, lays out more red tape than red carpet, so I like to hear what people, where their problems are and see if I can help.
On the board. And missing is Mr. Hawkinson, who is also a residential contractor. That's everybody, I believe.
We actually have 3 other members who are not here tonight. Hannah, would you read their names out?
Mr. Eric Cowling, he is our electrical engineer. And then there's Roy Field, he's off right now, and Sabrina O'Donnell.
Good. If you would please silence your telephones if you have them with you. And I'd like to entertain a motion for approval of our agenda, please. I saw a hand there and a movement at the same time, so moved by Barry, and second?
I'll second.
Okay, Mr. Ferdine. We do have a couple little things to add in there, is hopefully if our assembly member, as it shows up, clerk, we will have a swearing-in ceremony for new members, and we should have an audience participation after reports, but I don't see anybody here, so I don't see that being of issue here. Depending on when the clerk shows up, we'll just kind of slide that swearing in at that time. Any other discussion for the minutes?
For the
Dr.
agenda, you mean?
Or for the agenda, excuse me. Hearing none, we can move forward with approval of the minutes for the meeting of August 29th, 2013. I'll entertain a motion for approval, please.
Mr. Chair, I move for approval of the minutes.
Moved by Mr. Ferdine,
I'd like to second.
second by Mr. Steele.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, I had one comment that I'd like to maybe clarify. On the motion on page 2, the motion was made that we do not support the ordinance as submitted, and the vote was framed in 8 opposed and 0 in favor, unanimously approved. I think there's a conflict with the language, and my memory isn't as great, but I think maybe the motion was framed in the positive light, thus the vote, but we should probably check on that.
Yes, we have noted that, and we also noted that farther down there, Ms. O'Donnell's motion that the board write a letter to the Assembly. The board discussed this for several minutes, given the suggestion of what is needed to be in the letter. Chair call for a vote, and that should be 0 opposed, 8 in favor. So we will take a look at how do you want to do that? Look at the minutes and figure out which way to straighten that out? Yes.
Mr. Chairman, if we're comfortable with that, should we just maybe suggest those as changes and approve, or do we feel more comfortable with adjustment?
I would recommend that we make a motion to, or we correct this and approve it, and we'll just get the paperwork straightened out afterwards so that it's done.
Thank you.
So that would be, we're going to make that a positive and then 0 and 8.
Mr. Chair?
Ms. Welch?
Ms. Jones is here now to do the swearing in, and apparently we have an apology to Ms. Jones because she was under the impression the meeting started at 6:30. So that's sorry for giving you the wrong time.
But all right, we'll manage.
Actually, your timing is perfect because this is right where we had hoped that we could do this. So I will turn it over to you as soon as you are ready.
Well, usually we have you come down here. So how would you like to do 2 steps? We swear in you and then something like swear in you.
Re-swear that
You want to
current.
Mike?
And then sort of okay? All right, come on, everybody come on. For the Lord.
Mr. Logan, Mr. Edwards, and
We can push you around to the podium, then we can get that on the tape too, please.
Well, they're going to be the ones.
No, videotape, but the audio is on the mic.
That's right, yeah, they're going to stand over here. There you go. So, you, just so that you know what you're saying. Okay? And we're going to do the repeat after me. Okay? All right? So, you need to, we're going to have you raise your right hand and swear, and then when I say your name, be sure to say your name, not say your name. Okay? So, are we ready? Raise your right hand. Repeat after me. I solemnly swear or affirm
I solemnly swear or affirm
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States,
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States,
the Constitution of the State of Alaska,
the Constitution of the State of Alaska,
and the Charter of the Municipality of Anchorage,
and the Charter of the Municipality of Anchorage.
and that I will faithfully perform the duties
I will faithfully perform the duties
of the Platinum Board to the best of my ability.
of the Planning Board to the best of my abilities.
Congratulations.
Except this is the Building Board of Regulation Examiners and Appeals.
It's the building, you said?
Board of Building Regulation Examiners and Appeals.
Oh, so that was one of my other questions, but I didn't get an answer to. Okay, it is the building,
Jerry, you hand her an agenda right there, we'll have it on the top.
okay, great. All right, so now we have to do the whole thing over. All right. So did you say it right, or did you say the bottom board?
You said what you said.
So let's just do it real fast.
I thought you were volunteering us for
No,
another position.
I am, you didn't know that, the mayor has already appointed you all, now you're on the planning board too. Okay, we'll do it a little bit quicker this time, are you ready? Okay, I solemnly
Swear
I solemnly swear
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States,
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States,
the Constitution of the State of Alaska, and the Charter of the Municipality of Anchorage,
the Constitution of the State of Alaska and the Charter of the
Municipality of Anchorage.
and that I will faithfully perform the duties
I will faithfully perform the duties
of the Board of Building Regulation Examiners and Appeals
of
of the Board of Building Regulation of Examiners and
and
Appeals.
Appeals
to the best of my ability.
to the best of my ability.
Great. All right. So now I'm going to have you sign, and let me just correct this here. Could you still say plating board here? Make sure you get that right. All right, great. Thank you. I got one there too, all right? Okay. Gentlemen, please raise your right hand. I solemnly swear
I solemnly swear
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
and the state of Alaska
and the state of Alaska
and the charter of the municipality of Anchorage,
and the charter of the municipality of Anchorage,
and that I will faithfully perform the duties
and that I will faithfully perform the duties
of the building board of the Board of Building Regulation Examiners and Appeals
the Board of the Building Regulation Examiners and Appeals
to the best of my ability.
to the best of my ability.
Congratulations. So, would you like oaths to swear yourself in? I've got some oaths, extra copies. Congratulations. Congratulations. Would you like to sign it?
Sure.
All right, I'd like to start signing. And if you want to write building board there, you should probably do that.
Is that your? No, that was her.
Let's see. So we need a couple more there. Thank you.
I'm done. Go ahead. You're done? Yep.
I like this guy who just did the building board. That's really good.
Maybe that's why I was the first one done. That's what we most commonly call ourselves, is just a building board. That's, I think,
So I threw you when I used
well, the plating board definitely threw us. We don't need them, or do we?
No, I think you're okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Barbara.
You are welcome, and it looks like you are all official. Please go forward and regulate. Thank you. I'll make copies and share that.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
And we'll send the other members down to the office to get sworn in.
Next on our agenda is the appearance request for public hearing, and we have none, so we can move on to unfinished business, which we have none, so we can move on to new business, starting with orientation.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This will be the bulk of our business tonight. We've made each of you an orientation booklet. Please keep a hold of this. You'll need it for future, you'll want to be referring to it for future meetings. Three-member panels should you be asked to sit on a three-member panel and so on. So we'll work our way through this book at this time. First, the oath of office. We've just taken care of that. Thank you very much. And ethics. The next tab is ethics information. We're not going to read every line of it tonight, but what's printed in here for you is the municipality's code of ethics, and we ask that you familiarize yourself with that. and fulfill your duties accordingly. Any questions? Okay. The next item in your book is a list of the members and their term and the time of terms. So please double check your name, and if you have any corrections to make, please let Tana know.
And also, please give me your cell phone numbers for when we do the 3-member panels, and I need to call you.
Okay? So if you could just email Tana your name. Where's your name? You're at the bottom here. Or you can call Tana at 343-8301, and please give her a contact number, a good cell contact number. Okay, any questions about the roster? We do have one vacancy. Well, it's a good time to note that the ordinance that establishes the board allows up to 15 members, and it has to have at least 11 members. We have the ordinance for you further back in the packet. At present time, we have 13 seats that have been traditionally occupied. We have, you'll see as on the roster, you'll see what each seat is representing. So we have the potential to add 2 more seats. At this time, we're trying to fill the electrical contractor mandatory seat, and then we have the remaining seats are, I would call them at-large seats. Okay? Questions about that? Nope. Okay. The next page gives you contact of staff, and just to explain, Title 23 designates the building official as the secretary to the board in terms of the office of the secretary of the board, and then for the administrative secretarial duties, Ms. Klunder, my assistant, carries those out. On the staff contact list, you'll see various names of people in the plan review and permitting section. We would ask, these are here for your information, we would ask that if you have questions about board business that you direct them to me through Tana, rather than call these people directly. Okay. Okay, next is the seating order, and we took some liberties with the seating order tonight because of the number of people on the full board now at 13. There's 11 seats on this upper tier here, and if all 13 people were to be here, we would have the additional 2 seats would use one of these seats down here. We rearranged names a bit tonight so everybody could be on the upper tier. So typically, though, when you come in, the names will be arranged in this order, depending on what happens with the election of chair and vice chair, who sit in the places where Mr. Boney and Mr. Ferdine are, respectively, tonight. Okay. Okay. Now talk a little bit about board member responsibilities, and you'll find in that tab it's a summary of kind of the goals and responsibilities of a person sitting in your position regarding behavior and comportment and the types of actions you should be ready to take. So you can read that at your leisure, and any questions, let us know. But I would ask you to familiarize yourself with that, because if everyone's operating under these goals and assuming these responsibilities as a group, you'll tend to have much more effective meetings. Okay? Okay. Following that, we have the AMC Title 2310, which is the administrative part of Title 23, which is kind of the bread and butter of how the building functions operate at the municipality. And you'll find that there, in addition to 2310, which was most recently updated in May of 2013, I believe, you'll find behind that Anchorage ordinance number 2013-91. It's an ordinance that was passed in August of 2013, and the folks who update the code have not had a chance to incorporate that into the published version of the code. So keep in mind that the code that you'll be asked to refer to is Title 2310 plus the changes in 2013-91. And the Municipal Attorney's Office takes care of the updates, and they've assured us that they're working to get this consolidated. And when we have a new update, we'll give it to you. Okay. Next thing in your packet is the AMCR 23, the municipal regulations. There's two parts to, call it the code. There's the Anchorage Municipal Code and the Code of Regulations. Sam, would you like to explain how they relate to each other?
I think for present purposes, they're kind of one and the same, really, aren't they? I mean,
Right.
I don't know how they come about.
Okay.
I mean, the regulations are sort of secondary to their interpretation to some extent of the code.
And
But they, I'm not sure
Okay.
for right now.
well, I'll jump in then.
Okay, go ahead.
In fairness to Sam, it's his first meeting with the full board here. So the Code of Regulations is supplemental to the code itself, and it deals, as far as you guys are concerned, it deals with your procedures. And you'll find that behind the next blue tab. And this is an important one to refer to as well. It tells you how we're organized, who's who in terms of the appointments, how the meetings are to be run, how the case files are to be established. I'd like to especially call your attention to page 3 of 5. Is everyone there? Ex parte contacts prohibited, and conflict of interest. Those are important, very important regulations for you to familiarize yourselves with. As you are asked to hear appeals or to examine a new piece of code or regulation, it's very important that you follow these procedures so as not to subject your decision to question or further appeal. And so, for example, tonight, if you go to page 4 or 5, you'll see the order of business for a regularly scheduled meeting. And we'll be coming back to this, but that's what AMCR 2310 is. It's sort of your rights and rituals for taking care of your business. Okay? Okay. The last, you'll see in the procedures, it will say that, in general, meetings are to be conducted according to Robert's Rules of Order. And we've included a summary, kind of a synopsis of Robert's Rules of Order. Next is findings of facts. And this is when you do make decisions, you're required to, like if you hear an appeal, you're required to make findings of fact as to, why you determine the basis of your decisions. And this is a summary of how to go about putting those findings together. And then after that, we have miscellaneous, which is, we're talking about scheduling meetings. The procedures call for you to have regularly scheduled meetings on the first and third Thursday of each month. That would be the schedule. So, in general, it is appropriate for you to keep an eye on that schedule. Of course, not everyone's going to be able to be at every meeting, but keep an eye on that schedule when planning, your personal schedules. Now, having said that, this board meets for certain types of actions. It meets to hear appeals. It meets to review matters having to do with changes in the code. So, for example, the code adoption process, or time to time when an ordinance is coming along to just change one part of the code, we we bring it, if it's Title 23, you guys are to review it first before it goes to the Assembly generally. So when there is business to be done, we attempt to have it, use one of these regularly scheduled dates. For example, we have the Assembly chambers signed up for all these dates. If there is no business to be done, then we will cancel that meeting, and generally with ample time, so you'll understand that you don't need to be here that evening. Questions about that?
I did want to make a quick comment on the ex parte context, because I choked so badly when Sharon asked me to explain a regulation from an ordinance. Not usually that tongue-tied, but the ex parte thing, we just had, just to give an example of, like one of those three-member panels, we had gotten some questions that were perfectly reasonable questions from the panel members to us, and so they just wanted to know some things about what was going on and procedural and that kind of thing. And if we're declining to answer, it's just because we're trying to follow that ex parte thing, or that ex parte rule. And so we kind of wound up saying, we'd just rather not answer that right now, but we'll issue something. So it's just prohibiting sort of side conversations about the substance of something. And so I think it might have been kind of frustrating that people were asking what was a reasonable question of me or Sharon and not really getting much of an answer. And that's just because we're trying to make sure that we're not communicating with any of you about something that's actually in play right now. So that's, if you get kind of a cryptic non-response to something, that's kind of, we're trying to make sure to follow that, that 2310-008 portion, just rule carefully so that everything's above board.
Right. And we'll come back to that in a little more detail. Another example of ex parte is assume that there's an appeal that's scheduled for you to hear, and you run into one of the people who's involved in the appeal, say in the grocery store, and they say, "Oh, Troy, glad to see you. Hey, about that appeal, now I hope you understand that this is what I'm looking for there." And you should say, "I cannot talk to you about this case, and if you say anything more about it to me, I'll have to excuse myself from the board." I mean, it's very important that you maintain the integrity of that process. You're free to talk amongst yourselves in advance of the case actually being heard, but not to any other parties. Either, and if it's an appeal of one of my decisions, not to me either. You're supposed to hear the case on the basis of what's presented to you at the hearing. So we'll come back to that in a little bit, but it's a very important part of being a member of any board or commission. And then following, on the next page, following the schedule is attendance. And this is from Title IV, and it explains if you're on a board, you're expected to attend as much as possible, and if not possible, to be excused by the chair, to explain your reason for not being able to be there so that it can be an excused absence. Okay, and that's the end of the book. Now let's go back and talk about some other things. So going back to the front. The board packets are emailed or delivered the Friday before the meeting. Traditionally, back when everything was done by paper, a courier ran around and brought packets on Friday before the meeting. Typically now we're able to email those unless they're too voluminous, depending on what the item is itself. So they will have your agenda, minutes of the meeting. If there's an appeal case, they'll have the details of that appeal. The code we already talked about. We have Title IV, which establishes you, Title 2310, which is the building code, AMCR 2310, which is your rights and rituals, your rules of procedure. Okay. Questions so far? Okay. Moving on. The mission of the board is a quasi-judicial board, which, Sam, would you like to explain that?
Sure, that I can maybe, where are you reading, just in general?
Yeah.
Well, it's quasi-judicial, I mean, I guess it's just to make decisions, like,
To carry a force.
to carry the force, they're binding decisions. I'm not doing very well on the spontaneous explanations. I mean, does anybody have a question about that? Maybe that's a better way, too.
Okay, generally it means, Jerry, would you like to chime in on that?
The board being a quasi-judicial board? Okay. Basically, your actions, the actions are appealable to Superior Court, so everything you do is on the record. The record would go forward on an appeal to Superior Court. You need to make good findings when you make your decisions. The basis for your decision, whatever discussion took place in the debate, if you could just reiterate the high points there for making your decision, and that should be pretty complete.
Okay. A quorum of the board is it's detailed in the code as, if you were talking about the full board, a quorum is 50% plus one of the appointed members. So at present, we have 12 members, and we hope to have the electrical contractor member shortly. So let's say we have 13 members. With the 12, a quorum would have to be 50% plus one, so it would have to be 7 members present for the full board to establish a quorum. For the 3-member panels, which we'll talk about in a bit, it's 2 of the 3 members, or 2 of the 3 constitute quorum. So with that, let's switch back over to the code.
Mr. Chairman? If I could ask a question in terms of the membership. My member register, I total 14 individuals, though one may have not been sworn in this evening. Am I incorrect with my count? You had mentioned 12.
I am corrected, thank you.
And then a follow-up question, in terms of calculating the quorum, the fraction rounds up to the next full member?
50% plus 1.
So if it's 9 1/3, it goes up to 10,
Right.
et cetera. Thank you.
Okay. So let's go to the code part, which is back in, and go to 10343. So it's about, and I apologize, these pages aren't numbered, it's about, about 6 or 8 pages into the code. 2310-10343. And that talks about the board composition and the quorum and voting, and then the 3-member panels. The 3-member panel provisions are a relatively new organization of the board. It was established by Ordinance 2012-31S, and so it's only been about a year and a half that we've been working with this system. We've had a few appeals heard in this manner. We've had probably 5 or 6 appeals heard in this manner, and we're beginning to get the nuts and bolts of it figured out. But essentially, the 3-member panel, if you go to Part C, a building board 3-member panel hearing panel shall hear and decide appeals from decisions of administrative officials and other enforcement orders related to code regulations under Title 23. A person with the right to appeal has 30 days from the date of the action of the official to file an appeal, unless the longer time period stated in the decision. And if no appeals filed, the action of administrative official is deemed final and binding, not subject to further appeal. Okay, going on. Hearing panel quorum and voting. A quorum for a hearing panel shall be 3 panel members. The decisions have to be 2 of the 3 have to vote for a decision to swing one or the other. So all 3 members, and I'll correct my previous thing that a quorum was 2 of 3. All 3 members of a hearing panel must be present to have a 3-member panel. For voting, the granting of an appeal shall require the concurring vote of 2 of the 3 members. There's also an option for ability to have a discretionary de novo rehearing. In its sole discretion is determined by a majority vote of 50% plus 1. This is a little, bear with me, this is the way the ordinance was written. Not disqualified from voting under this subsection, the building board may accept an appeal decided by a three-member panel, whole or in part, for a de novo rehearing by the full board. De novo, I had to look it up myself, means a new hearing. So what happens is a three-member panel hears an appeal. If either party of that appeal, either in this case municipality, staff, or the appellant, the person making the appeal, either party can say, I disagree with the three-member panel's decision, I want the full board to hear it. Okay, at that point, once someone's made an application to ask the full board to hear it, then the full board, minus the three members who are on the panel, votes on, meets and decides whether or not to accept the appeal to rehear the case. And if they decide, without the vote of the three people who are in the original panel, then they decide to take up the issue, then the full board rehears it, including the three members that were on the original panel. This is significant because, as of today, we have our first request for a de novo hearing. So,
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Walsh, this is kind of like the tree falls in the wood, does it make a sound? If the three-panel board chooses not to hear an appeal, can it in fact be appealed de novo, however it's pronounced, in the fact that the appeal wasn't heard?
Well, that is in fact what happened today. Last week, there was a three-member panel hearing a case about a decision of, in this case, it was the board chair and building official correct, okay. So, there was a three-member panel that met last week. The appellant determined, or the panel determined not to hear the case. They did not feel that it was a proper case for a three-member panel to hear. That decision of that three-member panel has been appealed. And as far as we know, that decision can be brought forward. We just received it today, so we'll discuss it with the municipal attorney's office. But until we sort that out, assume that it will be coming before you as a full board, minus the three members who were on that panel, to decide if you want to hear that case. We'll get details to you shortly. As I said, we just received this request today. I would, in this case, your next scheduled meeting would be 2 weeks from tonight, February 20th. So we would ask that you check your schedule and plan on reconvening 2 weeks from tonight. In this room, Tana? In this room. We'll get details to you as we get it sorted out.
Ms. Walsh, just to clarify, you mentioned that the original three-panel member could not participate. The way I read the regulation, the three-panel member cannot vote. We could
Correct.
participate but not vote.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
So I was talking with Mr. Severner about that before the meeting tonight, and our interpretation at first blush is that the full board may deliberate, but in terms of taking the vote on whether or not to accept the appeal, that the three members who are in part of the irregular appeal cannot vote, but they can participate in the discussion as to whether or not it should be heard. Okay, questions? Okay. All right, so we've already talked about what constitutes an affirmative action for a vote. We've already talked about attendance. Okay, the types of appeals. On item 8 on your table of contents here. The types of appeals that you'll hear, and you'll see this back in AMCR, is it's either an appeal of a decision made by the building official, which those are generally technical in nature, The building official, I asked the building official if I could do an alternate means to put in an unlisted sink. And the building official said no. And the building official said the code says you can't put in an unlisted sink. And I appeal that because I think the building official incorrectly interpreted the, that part of the code. That's the type of, the technical types of appeals that you'll hear. And they are, you may also hear, you'll also be convened to look at regulations, review regulations. As I said, the new code, adopting of the 2012 codes will be coming up this year. So that will be something we'll bring to you as a board to review and hear. And you'll also hear another thing that notice and orders that we do. For example, you all recently read about the Big Timber Motel and that we had to do a notice to a violation under the Dangerous Building Code, and in one room notice to vacate that room under the Dangerous Building Code. A person has the right to appeal that, and they have the right to, that would be another type of appeal that you would hear, that the appellant would say, we disagree that we should have been given this notice of violation of building code. So that's another type you'll hear, so abatement orders. And so those are the main types that you'll hear. So now let's talk about the three-member panels. The way that the code is written is an appeal must come to a three-member panel first. Now, as a full board, you'll look at regulations, but in terms of an appeal, it comes to a three-member panel first. So if we go back to the code, and we go to selection of the panels, I should have used my tab version. Okay. I'm at 2310-10341, about the appeal panels. We'll start in the general part of that, and just to reiterate what I just said, you hear and decide appeals from decisions of administrative officials relating to building and fire regulations. You can hear and decide to grant modifications from strict application of the building code on appeal from the decision of the building official, determine the suitability of alternate materials and methods when hearing and deciding appeal, and conduct hearings or matters pursuant to the abatement of dangerous buildings, and to offer comment or recommendation concerning amendments to the building code and regulations or adoption of a new set of codes. Now let's get into details on the appeal panels. In order to hear and decide appeals from decisions of administrative officials and other enforcement orders, the building board shall establish three-member hearing panels from its pool of members qualified by experience and training to pass upon appeal matters pertaining to building construction and building and service equipment, and not employees of the municipality. So, pass upon appeal matters pertaining to building construction and building service equipment. Up to 5 hearing panels shall be established at the first meeting of each calendar year. So that's tonight. To hear appeals from decisions of administrative officials and other enforcement orders. The secretary to the board, which is otherwise in the code designated as myself, the building official, and the board chair shall assign members to a specific panel and may request members to take the place of regular assigned panel members when an assigned panel member becomes unavailable or to provide technical familiarity. At least 2 members of the panel hearing an appeal will be actively engaged in disciplines, trades, or professions relevant to the appeal. Okay, so this is an appropriate time to establish the panels.
Can you real quick tell us where you're at?
Oh, I'm sorry. 2310-10341. Everybody there? Okay. So, Mr. Boney may want to take things over at this point, but as a point of history, last year was the first year we were faced with this new procedure, and we established a civil structural panel, electrical panel, plumbing mechanical panel, and architectural panel. So we established which members are most closely aligned with those disciplines, trades, or professions. Those panels should be revisited tonight and names put to them. Now, what we found in practice is that it's not always possible to get all members, the 3 members that say, okay, we'll be on this panel. It hasn't always been possible to get those exact 3 members there. And as the code allows, the board chair and I can request other members to take the place of the regular assigned. So what we recommend you do tonight is establish those, assign people to those disciplines of panels, and generally along the lines of your disciplines, trades, and professions. So you would start with the electrical.
The residential community had requested that we had an additional 3-member panel kind of specifically for residential too. That being aside from the specific disciplines. And I'd like to hear a little discussion from the board on how they felt about putting together a residential 3-member panel. Mr. Steele?
I guess I would just start with an observation that there has been, I know the sense and the request in the past that such should be established, but I guess I'm a little cautionary about how finite we get, because conceivably you can start breaking this down. If it's an administrative aspect of the code, do we have an administrative committee? If it has a tangential link to, let's say, zoning, geotechnical development, does it then have a subset that has to have another category? How finite do we get with this? And in specifically responding, I guess, to the residential, the whole premise of the hearings we've been hearing that probably have brought this forward, I, for example, could be hired by a residential contractor to do a plan review in lieu of a permitting application. So, and I think the objection was potentially having a non-residential architect or representative. I'm not saying that we don't discuss and understand this, but I just wanting to find out how many of these do we establish, and would be cautionary that it could get, in a balance, could get very, very lengthy.
Mr. Hickel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't think that, you should put 3 builders on one panel just for residential, but if there's issues that come up in a residential nature, it would be nice to at least have a guy on there that can bring the perspective of some of the hardships that come along with it. Some of the disciplines, engineers deal with one specific thing, a builder's dealing with the whole thing, as long as dealing with the financial end at the same time. So, just as long as there's a balanced perspective, I struggle with it. Putting 3 of the residential guys for every residential thing probably doesn't make any sense. Plus, we need a good mix, but just, include some of us in there to add some perspective. So,
Mr. Feller?
Thank you, Mr. Hickel. That was going to be my comment. We have to be careful not to just put 3 residential contractors on the same panel, and I think maybe that's what some of the Home Builders Association members are maybe looking for, and we can't. That wouldn't be right to do that. Other comment is, so the code reads up to 5 hearing panels. Now we're talking about possibly forming more. How many do we have now?
Presently, there's four.
There's four, okay.
Electrical, mechanical, plumbing, civil, structural, and architectural.
Okay.
I see that we have that not quite written that way in the book, but that's what it's been.
So Mr. Steele made the comment, how detailed do we go with these panels? We can do up to 5 the way I read it.
Is that a question or the end of your statement?
I guess I'm just pointing that out. I guess the question would be, do we want to form another category?
Yes, sir.
I don't think there's anybody here that is wanting to form another category. I mean, I think Ray and I would be particular from the residential end, the ones that I guess somebody could call a question, but I don't think, I don't know. Who here is wanting to form the residential panel?
Mr. Hickle.
Yeah, I think it was requested by home builders. Home builders have a lot of issues specific to their needs, obviously, and but every group's going to want their own panel, I suppose. If it was an architectural issue, we'd want to have some architects and maybe throw in an engineer. And I'm new to this, so if you've got something where there's a residential, just try to include us. Let's try it out that way. You can always add one. But, I really don't know how this works exactly because this is my first night, but, just let us all have some input in some way so we all feel like we're part of the team, and I think that'd be pretty good.
I personally concur with you that the building board is made up of contractors, designers, builders, and of a lot of diversity in order to bring that diversity forward. And I would like to see that diversity kept to a large degree in our 3-member panels, not meaning that, the architects shouldn't kind of focus on their specialty, because I'm not specialty on mechanical and plumbing and electrical, but I'd hate to see an unbalanced jury, so to speak. Anybody else's comments? We can do this a couple different ways to create these 3-member panels. Either we can kind of sit here amongst the table here and work it out, or maybe we want to just go in the back room, kind of have a little work session and kind of lay it out and work over the table. What's the druthers of the board?
Mr. Chair, I'm not sure you have that option.
We can't go into a work session?
The first meeting, I think you need to it says, shall be established the first meeting of each calendar year, so I think it's supposed to be during the meeting. And as I recall last year, it was, electrical, okay, your electrical engineer, electrical contractor, and, a general contractor or something. I don't think it'll take that long if you just dive into it.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Fredine.
Mr.
Feller, excuse me.
I'll make a suggestion. If you just read each category, and everyone that feels that they are qualified to sit on that panel, just raise their hand. And I guess the other comment, Tana has mentioned that sometimes it's difficult to find 3 members to attend the appeals. So let's try and have, at least 4 and 5 people on each panel if we could.
Do we want to have a primary and 3 primaries and alternates thereafter to kind of give her some direction of the primaries?
Yeah.
Mr. Gray.
Chairman, I thought it was brought up earlier that in lieu of one of the members on the 3 panel that couldn't attend one of the hearings, that the chairman or the MOA fill that position.
That is true. Just kind of gives us some focus of places to start to, instead of Sharon and I getting together and creating a list, if we got them there's a couple alternates sitting here ready to go, then it just kind of speeds up the process for TANA a little bit here. You still have questions?
Well, I was just going to, I'm more thinking in my line of work here. I just can look at the mechanical and plumbing category, and I think it's pretty sure that there's three of us on this board right
Yeah.
here that would be in that position.
As I looked across the table here a little bit, this may be a whole lot easier than I thought it was going to be, so.
That's kind of where I'm going with it, but I don't know who might have something to add to our trade that would be on the board other than, as an alternate.
Well, we do have general contractors, too, that can cross the boundaries a little bit into more than just one discipline. Mr. Ferdine.
Mr. Chair, as I read the regulation, it says up to 5 hearing panels shall be established the first meeting. The regulation doesn't say how many people are to be designated on those panels in the first meeting. So by all means, the regulation allows us to have a list of 5 people for each panel, and as you're proposing, so I think that's fully within the regulation.
Other discussions? Yes, sir. Mr. Strait.
A suggestion perhaps for each panel, as you mentioned, Mr. Gray mentioned, there's several of us on the board that are very specific to different of the panels, and then we have the contractors as well. Perhaps we aim for each panel, including the specific engineers or architects, as well as at least one general and one residential member from the contracting community on each one. That way, when, depending on the direction of the appeal, can choose the best 3 out of the group to hear it.
Mr. Hickel?
Thank you. I appreciate that comment. There's a lot of expertise here, too, that if I'm on a panel, I'd like to see some diversity. So if I have a question, it sure would be nice to be able to speak amongst the panel members to get the question answered that I need to make the decision. So thank you.
Any other discussion? So we can start working on the list a little bit. We've got architectural, mechanical, plumbing, electrical, and civil structural. Mr. Loken, would you like to volunteer for a particular panel, or would you like to wait to see how others shake out before you throw your hat in?
The two that would be, I guess, the primary one would be civil structural, and then the next one would be architectural. Plumbing, electrical, I don't mind helping out on, but my expertise is not in those areas. Mechanical, electrical.
Thank you. Mr. Steele? Mr. Edwards?
Mechanical,
Plumbing?
if there is a committee on residential construction, I would probably volunteer for that too. I put my first 20 years in residential construction.
Mr. Gray?
Mechanical plumbing.
Mr. Ferdine?
Mechanical plumbing.
Mr. Merchant?
Mechanical plumbing.
Mr. Feller?
Civil structural, and then as an alternate for architectural.
Mr. Strait?
So
Mr. Hickle.
Civil, structural, architectural. I have some practical experience, but no engineering degree on the mechanical, and I'd like to be an alternate if need be. If not, that's fine.
Alternate on
Plumbing, mechanical.
plumbing mechanical, okay. And I'm most interested in architectural. Some of our absentee participants are, Mr. Cowling is electrical engineer, so we will volunteer him for that. Serena O'Donnell,
I believe Serena served on the electrical last year as well.
does that sound familiar? And one more, Hawkinson. I forgot where his interests were.
He served on civil, structural, and architectural.
Hawkinson. Right. And Mr. Fields was primarily civil structural, primarily in the civil. And if I remember right, he had some interest in the architectural as an alternate too, or yeah.
So I have civil, structural, Loken, Feller, Straight, Hickle, Hawkinson, and Fields. Okay, I have an architectural, Loken, Steele, Feller, Straight, Hickle, Hawkinson, and Fields. I don't have Mr. Boney down anywhere.
Architectural.
Then mechanical plumbing, Edwards, Gray, Ferdine, Marchant, and Hickle. And then electrical.
And Loken offered to be an alternate on that as well.
Right. Thank you. And then electrical is one we're a little short. We have Cowling and O'Donnell. Tanner, remind me, do we have a possible candidate for electrical contractor for the empty spot?
No,
We do not.
he declined.
All right, then I would encourage each and every one of you to speak with folks you know who are electrical contractors who may be interested in applying so we can fill that slot. In the meantime, we would probably want to go with it if we had an electrical appeal, which we haven't had one to date, but if we did, before we're able to get that person, I'd recommend probably one of the general contractors. So we can maybe fill that panel out, and we can see, we have Serena. Mr. Edwards, how do you feel about that? Do you have much electrical background? No. Okay, so we'll put you as an alternate, and then when we get our electrical contractors, that's suitable? Does that work for you, Mr. Boney?
I have no problem with it at all. I think that's quite good.
I think that covers it. Okay, so, Mr.
Loken?
So, remind me again how that 3 members chosen, since we have, say, a civil structural that is loaded up more so than the others. Who picks the 3-person board again?
Well,
what does that?
For example, let's talk about partial height blocking. We get an appeal for partial height blocking. I believe we had Mr. Feller, Mr. Straight, the structural engineers, because the issues had to do with uplift and all that kind of thing. And then Mr. Michelson, who was a former general contractor in the residential world, filled that out. That would be a typical way to assign it. The other appeal we've had, most of them have been actually framing type related, seems like. Some have been procedural.
It just seems like instead of Mr. Michelson, an architectural spot could have filled that too, so I just didn't know
Right. Could have.
how that panel is selected. Not that I have a real problem with it, I just don't know
Right.
how it's selected. Do you select them?
Well, this is kind of a pre-list, and then when we get out of that a little bit, then Ms. Walsh and I get together
We confer.
and confer and come up with a list of names Tana starts calling on.
So we exercise the second part of item 1 there, where it says that we may request members to take the place of a regular assigned member when an assigned member is unavailable, or to provide technical familiarity. So it does give us quite a bit of leeway. Well, although we really strive to get the main profession, disciplines, trades, or professions relevant to the appeal, and then we choose the next closest person with relevant experience if we can't get the people at the exact.
So you select them?
We select them, correct. Yeah.
This is just everybody's opportunity to kind of throw in their hat to their points of interest and shy away from their weaknesses a little bit. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, one quick question in terms of going through this. On the refresher on the second page, it lists the 4 established, and item D was civil/architectural.
Right.
Yet I heard everyone referring to civil/structural as their preference. Is it correct understanding that C is civil structural and D is architectural, or?
Correct. That's how it was set up. I believe that was a
So it's civil/structural?
civil/structural.
Right.
And that makes sense because civil engineers, structural engineers are often crossing. Okay?
Any other, Mr. Straight?
Yeah, just a kind of a question about establishing these, kind of following on Mr. Loken's comment, is there a way we could set perhaps a board policy that when these 3-member panels are pulled together, that there's at least, not equal representation, but representation of both the design side, the engineers, and the contracting side? That way a residential builder doesn't walk into a room full of engineers and architects and feel like there's nobody on the committee that hears his side. I mean, that's what we try to do, but is there a way to establish that to make sure that that does happen?
I'm a little reluctant to establish some guidelines that are very hard because Tana has quite a time sometimes just finding 3 people that can sit a board. That if we tied ourselves too much, I think we could be providing a disservice to the intent of this 3-member panel to be quick, flexible, in order to hear that appeal in a timely fashion. We can set that as a goal, but I'd hate to create a policy per se.
And if it helps, that's exactly what we have always tried to do.
Correct.
It's just been availability has been the issue.
Any other questions or discussions? Mr. Loken?
Excuse me, yeah, in 2310-103.4.1, the general, under A, appeal panels, in order to hear and decide appeals from decisions of administrative officials and other enforcement orders, the building board shall establish 3-member hearing panels from its pool of members qualified by experience and training passed upon appeal matters pertaining to the building construction and building service equipment, and not the employees in the municipality. I guess that reads that we would establish the panel to hear, not the building, not the muni. I still am a little lost on how these, so if somebody brings an appeal in, we have we have multiple people here that can represent a three-member panel that would qualify to hear that appeal. How are those three people selected to hear that appeal?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Severn has input.
Well, yeah, I was just going to, I mean, I think that what that last part that says, and not employees of the municipality, that's kind of is dangling in there at the end of a long paragraph. But I think what that's relating to is that employees of the municipality are not to be on the three-member panel. Not that employees of the municipality couldn't be involved in picking who's on any particular.
That's the specific, to the secretary of the board.
Yeah, it says the secretary of the board, which is the building official, is the one to assign members to a specific panel.
Secretary of the board, of the board along with the chair, yes.
Right.
So the statement in A, the building board shall establish three-member hearing panels from its pool, where does that play into the,
I think that's what we just did, is we established those pools. That was the volunteering process, was to establish those pools. But then when it comes time to actually, I think what...
Specific panel.
Yeah, specific panel. When it comes time to do a specific hearing and pick a specific panel, then that's a process between this is Sharon, basically, whoever's in her position, and the chair of the board.
Okay.
I think I get the part of your question that you're getting at, is what is the mechanics of when an appeal is all of a sudden set, who then actually sets up the board, right?
Who sets up that panel? We all have selected to be upon what panel, but there's more than three people that are capable of doing that. So who picks those three people out when that panel comes in?
The building official and the chair of the board. Is that correct?
Under item 1. So item 1 speaks to that specifically.
Secretary to the board and the board chair.
To assign members to specific panel, that's the key word, specific panel. Okay.
And I think that part of the reason why we were talking about having like 6 or 7 on one is just that simply when it comes time to actually have one of these, the idea behind it was to make it fast, and so we ought to be able to go through a long list of have...
My question's answered.
Any other questions or discussions? Mr. Steele.
Just one quick question. Is there a time limit once an appeal is received in terms of establishing the panel? In other words, could it be indefinite until you got that mix, or is there... obviously you want to be timely. The intent and purpose is to hear the appeal, but I guess my question is, I don't know that I've come across anything that says there's a time clock that starts. And
You go to, that has come up. Generally, it's within 5 days of when the appeal is filed. So when you go to 2310-10344, it talks about the secretary of the building board, which is the building official. We prepare correspondence, send out all required notices within 5 business days, keep minutes of all meetings, maintain a file in each case. So we have been using that 5 days as, we have 5 days first to examine the appeal, because we've had some appeals that are not appropriate to be heard, and we've said this is not an appealable item. And then we tell the appellant that, and in some cases they say okay, in some cases they say no. We'll leave that at that. But we've been using 5 days. Once we determine that it's a valid appeal, then we try to have the notice to the appellant, okay, we have chosen a panel, we've scheduled a hearing. We have to have 7 days' notice to have a hearing. So we've been working with the 5 days.
so you started off by saying you started with 5 days before the 5 days ticks in, and the 5 days is for you to validate if the appeal is appropriate. And that language is stated...
Well, it's, if you recall last year when this ordinance first came forward, we ended up kind of charting it out, and we had the Dennis Wheeler here, and we walked through the whole process, and the ordinance isn't exactly clear, but that's been the interpretation, the most practical interpretation of it.
The only reason I'm going down this line is I think there's been a couple of times an inference that this might not be the right makeup for the panel, and it's explained, and I don't know if it's fully understood by the appellant, that not everyone is available. So I just wanted kind of everyone to understand that you could leave this open-ended until the perfect panel was able to meet, or you have a time clock and you're trying to do your best. So just trying to understand that.
Mr. Logan.
Sorry, I'm not trying to get hooked up on this, but when I reread that again, I guess I would ask legal to just look into this so that we're going down the right. The secretary to the board and the board chair shall assign members to a specific panel. That doesn't say appeal. It says a panel, which is kind of what we did tonight. The panels are...
The panel is a 3-member panel. Their next appeal is the full board.
Well, I think if I can help, all this discussion is under the category appeal panels.
Mm-hmm.
So all of this is in that context.
I see where he's coming from there. Yeah.
I'm not trying to belabor, I'm just really trying to understand it, and I guess that specific panel just, it still doesn't, I just have to read it more, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And when an appeal comes in, TANA will, once we pull together whomever's the first call, so to speak, TANA gets on, makes those contacts, find out who's available for that particular date, and works her way down the list. So she'll make the calls to make sure that the word gets out.
I use a program called Doodle, and it's through email, so make sure your emails are good. And I set out several dates, definitely not Tuesday nights when they are assembly nights, but I put out dates like Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Fridays. Try not to do Fridays because I know everybody likes them off. But I pick times, so usually it's about 6 o'clock, and I just go down the list, and hopefully everyone accepts a good date and time.
So then you email, that's just sounded like you selected those 3-member panels. It's still...
No, it's a select invitation off of this list that we just made.
Yep. So what if, so say there's 4 people that can make it. I mean...
Okay, here's how it'll work. Is the appeal will come in, and we'll look at the nature of it, and we'll say, okay, this is a residential framing one, so we need, we'll want a structural, and it's generally structural. So we'll have structural, we need a residential contractor, and maybe both structurals, or maybe an architect and a structural and residential contractor, again, depending on the nature of what the technical item is. And so we'll choose the 3 off this list that you guys came up with tonight. We'll call...
choose those.
Right. We'll call 3 people of that nature, say, are you available? And they'll say, yes, I am, yes, I am, yes, I am. I'm here in town for the next 2 weeks, or whatever it is. Some may say, I'm going to be gone. So we go to the next guy. Once we have 3 people that say they're available within a certain time frame, then we drill down to the specific date through the program that TANA's talking about.
Okay, a follow-up question then. So when you are going through that process, do you include the building board chair in that process?
Yes.
Okay.
Definitely.
So, I I think that meets the intent of
Right.
the regulation.
Right.
Mr. Hickle.
I think I'm getting clear.
You're the first one on this table.
Well, so from what I understand, now you have a pool to pick from. So on a case-by-case basis, you've got a pool of people to choose from that either are available or you think would be right for it. So we're not setting the panel today for the term of this. You're having a pool of people, and you're going to pick according to the need of the situation. Is that right?
Correct. You're setting the pool, basically.
Right.
You're setting up the different pools.
So we're not on a panel right now. We may be called for a specific case.
Correct.
Okay, I got it.
Can I ask a question, Mr. Chair?
Mr. Merchant?
Sharon, out of the, I understand there was 5 appeals last year. How successful were those? Did everything go fairly smooth?
The first was a little rocky, mostly because it was the first time, and procedures, everyone was feeling their way through it. We held it in the middle of the day, and that turned out to be a problem because of time constraints. People had to be, I believe one member had to catch an airplane, so it was like the decision got rushed, and that didn't feel like it was, we worked our way through it. That first appeal was found in favor of the appellant, and had some follow-on work that actually became the subject of a later appeal, but we have not had one go to the full board yet. All the remaining appeals have been found in the favor of the building official.
Thank you.
Mr. Boney, you have
Yeah, I've got some peace. Okay, Mr. Straight.
One thing that I'm seeing as we're talking about this that may be something we should address to kind of protect the integrity of the system is if, for example, whether I be a contractor or engineer, but I have a problem with a decision by the building official, and I think the building official has it out for me. Sharon is angry at me for some reason, so I'm going to appeal this decision. And then I find out that Sharon, as the building official, is one of the people establishing the 3-member panel to hear my decision. It seems like that may be, from the appellant's point of view, a conflict of interest. And reading through this, it says specifically it's the board secretary and the board secretary and the board chair that make that decision.
The board secretary is the building official.
I believe the board secretary is...
No. Vice chair.
It's elsewhere defined in the code. It is in the beginning part about the board. It is item 4. In the same area, the building official shall be an ex officio member and shall act as secretary to the board, but shall not vote upon any matter before the board.
All right, so we are doing it as established. However, the question still stands. Is that a potential risk that somebody's going to point to that as a conflict of interest?
Yeah, I mean, it is really just kind of the way the ordinance is written. I think it's clear the point you're making is not off base, but I think that's just kind of the way the ordinance is written. There is a check on it, and that is that you can have that de novo appeal process too. So if you did go to the 3-member panel and you thought that because you were in a personal thing with Sharon, she gave you a bad board, you would have the option to have that appeal to the full board then. So I mean, there is kind of a check on that. If that 3-member panel is just just unfair, or in your opinion unfair, then you'd have that full board option.
Mr. Chair, if I could add, and I would say, well, first of all, in my particular I work very hard to work according to the code. The code's here, it's the book, it's the job I've been given is to enforce the code. So that's what I go by. And my personal opinions are supposed to not enter into it. And I work hard to carry out my duties in that way. But also, the board, it's not always going to be me in this position. I mean, building officials come and go. The board needs to put its faith in its chair to act in that initial decision. And if the board chair senses something like that, then the board chair it has to be both. People have to agree to set the panel. So the board chair is the first check on that situation.
Thank you. And just to be clear, I am not in any way questioning your judgment. I want to make that
Thank you, Mr. Strait.
Nor do I have any personal grudge against you. Thank you.
Nice cover. Any other questions or discussions? Hearing none, we kind of went down a rabbit's warren here a little bit. You had the floor to present the notebook and go through orientation.
Okay. To finish up, we've covered most of it. We'll go through the rest, we'll touch on the rest of the items in the contents here. I've already talked about effective board meetings. It's important to review the information in the packets before the meetings. If you have any questions or anything at all, please let us know as soon as possible. If the supplemental information is desired, it's difficult to deal with it on the day of. So sometimes things do come up at the last minute, new information comes in, but please, once you're either having a full board meeting to look at, say, adopting a new code or whatever, take the time to review your information. Understand the fundamentals of parliamentary procedure. We've given you Robert's Rules. I've also checked there's some good little apps on Robert's Rules now available it's Robert's Rules for, I found one that's just scripts that's very good that I can share with people if they like later. Understand your role as a board member, and again, respect the rules regarding ex parte communication. I myself served on the planning board for 6 years, 2 years as vice chair, 2 years as chair, and that does come up, and you have to have the red flag come up in your head to say, please do not talk to me about this. If you mention it again, I'll have to recuse myself from the panel because you've talked to me. When you have a participant in a case. Again, this is a small town. You're in the grocery store, you're in the front lobby, whatever. You say, we cannot talk about that. And usually that's all it takes, and people understand, and they back off. So it's very important because if that ex parte communication should happen, you should determine the case in a certain way, and another party who doesn't care for the decision wants to appeal it, they can appeal it based on the fact that you were known to have ex parte communication. So maintain the integrity of the process. It's very important. Appeal procedures, we've been through that enough tonight, I think. And the role of the chair, which is one of your next things to do here to finish up tonight, is the chair runs the meetings. The chair is in charge of keeping decorum, although we haven't had too much lack of decorum with this particular group, which is great. And the chair, it's important to keep the testimony moving and keep the discussion on a professional basis. Just the last thing, the general authority of the board members, you do hear appeal cases and make rulings that are quasi-judicial, which we've already talked about. It's a serious responsibility, and again, we thank you for taking it on. You can make evaluations on alternate materials and methods. There's specific conditions for how far you can go with that, and it's in the ordinance. So that'll be your guidance if something like that should come up. What the board does not do is direct or dictate to building official or staff about policy and procedure and the way the department is operated. We have a department to run, and we need to do that in the course of our daily business. You do not have the authority to waive code requirements, and that's clear if you get into read through your code, and it'll say, when you make your decisions, yes, you can accept alternate means and methods, but not to the point that it constitutes waiving the code. Excuse me. And you do not have the authority to make administrative decisions. For example, you wouldn't have the authority to call up Tana and ask her to do this and this and this and this for you. You can make requests along through the chair of things that need doing, but you need to respect what people's jobs are and what they are not. And with that, I think we'll return to the agenda, unless there's any other questions or discussions.
I think another thing I'd like to bring to everybody's attention is part of the do's and do nots is it is not appropriate to go visit a site of an appeal or to bring any additional information to the appeal. That basically you are to judge based on the facts presented to you at that point and not bring any additional information forward that other than what the appellant or the municipality is bringing forward.
Correct, and just kind of follow up on that. And this comes up with plotting board all the time also, is you're supposed to make your decision based on the evidence presented to you during the hearing, either in the packet or during the hearing, but not in any other form that's supplemental that not everyone has access to. So your expertise, what you know from your experience is, something that you take, you look at appeals in the light of your experience and your expertise and your prior knowledge of something similar. It may have happened on a different job site or something like that. But in terms of bringing in additional information that the entire group doesn't have, it's the burden of proof is on the person making the case, not on the board. So the person making the case has to bring the information forward. If they bring some information forward that you feel is incomplete in their appeal, you do have the right to request that be supplemented. For example, someone references a report in their appeal, per such and such report, but they don't include it in their appeal, then you can ask, you say, we need this report before we have our meeting, so we can review it before the appeal. So.
Mr. Ferdinand had a question.
I had a follow-up, and that was kind of similar to what my questions was if a situation occurs where underneath an alternate means and methods, someone is requesting, from a mechanical plumbing standpoint, the use of a piece of equipment or a system that we are not familiar with, do we have the ability to go and research that system or that piece of equipment online and say, well, I don't know much about ground source heat pumps. I want to learn something out there before the appeal so I'm actually knowledgeable about what they're discussing. Is that a gray area of ex parte where we're not...
That's to be avoided. Again, the burden of proof is on the person presenting the case. So if you don't feel that the packet contains enough information, then you request more information for all the board members to get at the same time, all the people who are going to be hearing the case to get at the same time.
Okay.
So that would be the best way to handle that.
So I'm sorry if I misunderstood you. We would request that information prior to the appeal to be sent out to the entire group?
You can. That's covered in the, it talks about request for additional information, and it may have the effect of extending the hearing. Supplementing the hearing packet, it's 2310-103-441. It says, when the building board panel requires data and documents not in the current possession of the building official, which would have been, because we would have received the appeal, the secretary to the building board shall act timely on the request to ensure the hearing packet is supplemented with requested information prior to hearing. If notice of appeal relies on but does not provide data, documents, or other information, the secretary shall request or provide the supplemental information within 5 days of receipt of a notice of appeal. Failure to request to receive supplemental information timely should be a valid reason to reschedule the hearing to a time when the supplemental information is available. So,
thank you. That answers my question.
Mr. Steele.
And this is something that I know I speak to oftentimes night of hearings. We oftentimes get quite a bit of information that's submitted that evening, and at times it's rather voluminous, and to be effective to digest that in the amount of time. I mean, it is brought in either by the city or the appellant side. Is it fair to say time out and make a motion to defer it to a later time so that you can have time with the information presented? I mean,
I would think so.
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, I think that'd be the appropriate thing to do if you got a bunch of stuff, and particularly, I suppose if both sides were in agreement that, sure, we'd like you to go ahead and read it, but I think on your own to say that, I think that would be totally reasonable.
Thank you. I had a question. Let me find it. The last page under oath is a disclosure of present economic interests. Is that something we are to fill out?
I'm not
Something
finding
we
where
have filled out, and when is it due?
Where is it?
I don't
It's in my package, the last page behind of oath.
I'm sorry, I just have one page in my oath of office. I'm missing that. You have it? I believe that's supposed to be filled out as soon as possible after taking office and before acting on a case. Is that right, Shannon? Yes.
Yes, to clarify that, I thought this was a form that we had filled out previously, and if you read down to the bottom, it says if the situation changes or acquire new interest, you're supposed to file a supplemental disclosure. I remember filling this form out previously, so is it required to be filled out again?
No, I just made sure everybody's packet was the same. These are for the new people.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Hearing none. Our secretary has, you're our secretary.
Your administrative
Our
secretary.
administrative secretary has brought to my attention here that we really haven't approved the building board minutes from August 29th. We've got a motion, we let it hang there when Mrs. Jones came in. So I'd like to go back to that. Some corrections that we have made on that is on page 2 of 2. As I understand it, Mr. Steele's motion to motion the municipal building board forward to the assembly a statement that they do strike the word not support AO 2013-95 as submitted. Mr. Straight seconded. The vote on that would be correct in that instance with that correction. And farther down, 2 paragraphs below that, the board and staff discussed for several minutes, given the suggestion as to what is needed to be in the letter. The chair called for a vote, and it should be 0 opposed, 8 in favor. Any other discussion toward the minutes? Entertain a motion. Well, we've got a motion to approve. It's been seconded, so I will call for vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, the minutes are approved. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. Next on our agenda is election of a chair and vice chair. So I will start with nominations for chair.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Steele.
Yes, I would like to nominate Scott Boney for chair.
I will second.
Motion by Mr. Steele, second by Mr. Ferdine. Additional nominees? Hearing none. For the sake of this, I will step aside a moment, and I'll let Mr. Ferdine handle that election. I'll recuse myself for this one.
Well, I believe since there are no other candidates forward, I do not know the technical word I should be using right now, but I think it's, I don't think you have to call for a vote when there's only one person. It's unanimous. It's, I should read my Robert Rules of Order. There is a term for that, but seeing no other candidates, I guess we'll do a hand vote. All of those in favor of Mr. Boney being the chair, raise your hand. Well, I guess majority rules. Mr. Boney has been voted the chair once again.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
We'll see. I'll entertain motion for vice chair. Mr. Gray.
I'd like to nominate Mr. Ferdine.
I second.
Moved and seconded by Mr. Gray and Mr. Steele. Other nominees? Hearing none, I'll close that ballot. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Hearing none, that carries.
Thank you.
Then we don't have to change chairs. Reports. I'll start with staff.
Okay, couple of things. I'm sure you're probably wondering what's going on with the adoption of the 2012 codes. We did go through all the technical committees last year. We're compiling the final items, getting that to legal. It did take a little longer than in past years. A couple of reasons. One, last year we had instead of rewriting the admin code, the 2310, for many years that's been done simply in-house by the building official. And this time I decided to form a committee and have industry participation, which was great. We had Luke Blomfield from Davis, Trevor Edmondson from Peterson Construction, Serena O'Donnell sat on that committee, Mr. Michelson on the committee for a while, and we got some real good input, but it did some great ideas, and it is taking longer to put all that together because we got into it pretty deeply. So we're wrapping that up now. Combine that with the very busy year we had last year. It took longer to get it all together, but we are wrapping it up, and we'll get it down to legal, and you should see that later in the spring. We'll bring it to you, all the technical code of local amendments, and the new 2310, and then after you've had a chance to make your comments, forward it on to the Assembly for their action. So that's what's going on with that. I've already spoken to, we do have a de novo appeal that was received today, a request for de novo rehearing. We'll schedule that for the 20th, and Tana will be we'll ask you if she'll be getting in touch with you to make sure we'll have a quorum for that de novo rehearing. So please plan on that. Ross, do you have anything to add?
Can you give us an update on where the state is in adopting the 2012 family of codes?
Oh, actually, Ross, maybe you're closer to that than I am.
At one time I was close to that, but I've since lost track.
Yeah. The last time I talked with Kelly Nicolello, the state fire marshal, he had said that they were behind us. But we'll check on that for you, and since you'll be meeting again in 2 weeks' time, we'll have an update.
Did I understand you correctly that our proposed amendments have gone before legal?
They're just about ready to go down there.
Okay, thank you. Any other reports?
If I could make a comment before you go on to board member comments, I would again like to reiterate how much we appreciate your time with these recent changes to the building board operations with the three-member panel, all that. There has been much more asked of you in the last 18 months, and we very much appreciate your willingness to serve. I understand the time it takes, and the people of Anchorage are lucky to have you.
Mr. Straight.
A question for staff through the chair. I'd like to hear an update on how things are going with the alternate method we have for residential permitting. Last time we spoke, there was quite a few hiccups. I'd like to hear how is it being utilized and is the process moving out, and how you feel it's working. Thank you.
Through the chair, there have been, last count, and this is as of a couple of weeks ago, there were about 68 exempt permits. You're speaking about the single family and duplex exempt process. There have been about 68, might be a couple more by now, but that's the neighborhood. There have been hiccups with any new process, just like with the three-member panel process. We've been doing our best to implement the ordinance as written, and that's there's been some learning by doing, both on our part and on the part of the people using the process. In some cases, it's gotten off track a bit, and if you've been following the Assembly hearings, you'll know there have been some revisits to the Assembly, trying to straighten some of that out. We did implement policy AG 38 to just try to line up the nuts and bolts of just the mechanics of getting these kind of permits processed. AG 38 was revised when further ordinance was brought forth. That's the one that I think took away the requirement for calculations to be submitted. And so we revised our policy to acknowledge that. So as things have evolved, we've been slogging through on the administrative side of it. On the actual in-the-field construction piece of it, a few hiccups there as well. The inspectors are it's taking them longer on those particular projects. Part of the reason is that it's just a familiarity thing. At one point, the plan reviews that came through the conventional process with the constant staff that we have, the reviews were generally the types of things that were commented on, the end product is generally something the inspectors were used to working with. With the third-party reviewers, they may be asking for different things, in some cases more detail than our own reviewers did, in some cases less. So the inspectors are having to get used to a different type of document to work from in the field. Then some of that will, as time goes on, some of that will, familiarity will, they'll gain familiarity. We're still working it.
You mentioned 68 permits, just rough approximation. What percentage of residential permits does that amount to?
It's about 13%.
One other follow-up question, if I may. Last time we met, we also discussed a potential ordinance adding commercial in that exemption. I've not heard anything since then. Where did that end up?
That ordinance was postponed indefinitely by Mr. Trombley. I believe at the night that he was postponed indefinitely, he said that he had some more work he wanted to do with it, and then he would bring it back at a later date. So it's been, we haven't seen him bring it back yet. You and this board did meet about that and voted, I believe it was 8-1. I'll have to go back and check. I think it's in these most recent minutes, that opposing that concept. And we do know that the State Fire Marshal was ready to testify against extending it to that, to commercial. And, but because it was pulled, it was pulled before the Fire Marshal appeared at public hearing.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Hearing none. Board member comments? I have one, and thank you, Tana, for helping us out here and for providing us some supper tonight, for all your help on all these board meetings. Anything else? I'll entertain a motion for adjournment. Who made motion? Mr. Loken?
I'll second.
Second by Mr. Gray. Thank you very much. We stand adjourned.
No, that's fun. I'm usually not bad at it. I try to be pretty good at it, but I just quasi-judicial. Hell, I don't know.
Or did you just, I don't know.
Yeah.